Hello, everybody. Hello, GDG Kitwe. I hope you're having a great day. And I know this is, you will be watching this at the end of a long day. And I hope you still have a bit of energy to think about generative AI. That's what I'll be talking about, adding generative AI to Flutter with the PaLM API. There will be a small little change in plan. I will cover the PaLM API, but I will also talk about Gemini API. So the material for this talk was developed in October, and I've given this talk a few times at local GDGs. But 2 weeks ago, Google launched a new language model called Gemini, and it replaces PaLM API. I didn't have time to update the slides, but I will point out the techniques I discuss here are pretty much the same with Gemini, the same it was with PaLM, and I'll point out where there would be differences. All right, before I jump in, I should introduce myself a little bit. My name is Sylvia Dieckmann. I am a freelance mobile app developer. I have not always worked as a mobile app developer. I started initially in the back end, did a bit of enterprise work, some web, although I was really rubbish at it, and eventually landed on mobile apps, initially Android. For the last few years, I've done exclusively Flutter. I live in South Africa and near Cape Town, Stellenbosch, but you might hear from my accent, I'm German. And I actually, at the moment, I am in Germany recording this talk, so that's why I'm dressed like for winter. And by the way, that in the background is Cape Town. It's a beautiful place. Yeah. Why am I talking to you? What's my expertise? So first of all, I am a certified Google developer expert. I just got recertified for the next year. I'm also Flutterista. Flutteristas is an online network of female and non-binary Flutter developers. They are extremely supportive, so if there are any female Flutter developers in the audience, please do yourself a favor and sign up for the Flutteristas. Of course, I'm also a Google Tech Maker, a Woman Tech Maker ambassador. That's a program by Google that aims to highlight the women in technology based on the feeling that there are too few of us doing IT. And then finally, I'm quite involved in the sister GDG group, GDG Cape Town. I used to lead the group. I don't do active organizational work anymore, but I still support them a lot. Yeah, why are we here? We want to talk about generative AI and some high-level concepts. And I'll do that by first introducing you to a few key phrases, but then we'll talk about an app idea I had, the wine snob. We'll talk about prompt design and about the PaLM API and how that relates to the new Gemini API. And we use that to develop a Flutter app. And then finally, if we have time, we'll look a little bit at the AI-generated content that you can get with these kind of experiments. All right, first, let's think about some key definitions. What do we have here? The first one, generative AI. I think it's probably fairly well known by now, but I just want to repeat in case there are junior developers in the audience. What I mean with generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that is able to generate new content that has not been there before by analyzing facts from the existing world. So in this form, you build a model of the existing world by analyzing millions and millions and billions of pages of content, and then the AI model will be able to generate new content based on that. So this can be videos, it can be speech, it can be audio, music, whatever. But in our case, it's written language, and that's usually realized by large language models or LLMs. At the time of this writing, PaLM 2 was the state-of-the-art Google large language model. It was actually a family of models of different sizes that you can plug together. That has been replaced by Gemini now. So PaLM is still around, but Gemini is considered to be better. These models are gigantic, difficult to build. So as an individual, you wouldn't typically build your own model. You interact with somebody else's model, and the big players in the market will launch new models every few months, and each one is more powerful than the one before. Right, a PaLM API was the API that we used to interact with the model. A prompt means basically the input to the model. And this is interesting for us now. So as an individual developer, you never get the chance to build your own model from scratch. I mean, that is way beyond the scope of a single person. But you interact with the model through the prompt, through the input. And that actually turns out to be a pretty big lever because, as it turns out, by rephrasing your input, by adding a bit of context, kind of specifying very precisely what you're looking for, kind of rephrasing the question a little bit, you can greatly improve your result. And that kind of tinkering with the input is called prompt design and turns into a bit of an art form at the moment. A Maker Suite is a tool that's provided by Google that helps with this prompt design. It makes it really easy to kind of iterate over different prompts and kind of improve on your prompt until it meets your needs. There's just one little catch with it. Maker Suite still exists, but it has been renamed to Google AI Studio together with the launch of Gemini. So you can still search for Gemini, for Maker Suite, or kind of go to the URL, but it will actually redirect to Google AI Studio. And I think that will be the name that sticks in the long run. All right, let's look at what an LLM is. I can't really go into too much detail, but I want to at least scratch the surface a little bit because I think it's important for understanding of the capabilities of our model. So basically, these large language models, some people refer to them as glorified text completion engines. And in a way, that's not too far from the truth. What they do is they calculate probabilities for everything. Huge, in massive amounts, but it's all about probabilities. So for example, this is a slide I took from Google, from one of their slide decks. It says, it uses the phrase, "It's raining cats and." Now, there'll be a follow-up word, and the model will calculate probabilities. So in this case, the word fish has a very low probability, but the word dogs has a very high probability. So that means the model will complete the sentence with the word dogs. It's raining cats and dogs. Now, to be honest, when I saw this example, I didn't like it all that much because I felt that this phrase, "It's raining cats and dogs," it's such a common phrase that, maybe the model just found this exact existence of this phrase so often in their input that they decided, they basically just looked up the phrase. So I tried to come up with something completely different. And this is where the model really blew me away. So I asked BART, which is basically Google's equivalent to ChatGPT, to complete the sentence, "Burgers need ketchup like Snook needs something." So this is a bit quirky, and most people would not know how to complete the sentence. It doesn't make a ton of sense. But it makes a little bit of sense when you live in South Africa and you know that snook is a fish. It's a local fish that South Africans love to braai snook. And South Africans swear that the best way to eat snook is with an apricot glaze. And so Bart caught up on that and actually completed the sentence, "Burgers need ketchup like snook needs apricot jam." Now, when I saw this example, I was pretty impressed because I'm pretty sure that this phrase does not exist in the literature yet. It is a really odd thing to say. And yet Bart was able to conclude from the existing facts that this was the logical completion of the sentence. All right, so much for the background. Let's jump right into the app. The app that I wanted to write, I called Wine Snob, bit of a tongue-in-cheek. That's how my family refers to me and my husband sometimes. So it's a Flutter app that generates wine tasting notes from very little information about a wine. So you just give it the vintage or the name of the wine or something like that, and the app will generate tasting notes from this. I actually wrote the app. You can try it out, and I'll publish the URL again later. But it's actually live and ready for tryout. By the way, I just want to give a very quick disclaimer. I'm talking a lot about alcohol now, and I completely understand that not everybody is comfortable basing their work life on alcohol. But really what I'm doing here is I talk about kind of sensual experiences expressed from the real world, taste and flavor expressed in language. Now that is relevant for wine, but you can do the same thing. A coffee taster in Rwanda would use the same techniques and vocabulary to talk about their coffee, or a chocolate taster or so. So if you're not comfortable with wine, just replace any usage of wine with any other medium like tea or coffee, for example. It will work just as well. I live in the winelands, there's wine around me, so I'll stick with wine for the remainder of this talk. Right. So I want to give you an idea of how these tasting notes can look like. So this is an actual example. This is not AI generated. I took this from the website of a popular wine, South African wine, the Merlust Rubicon 2018. It's a very, very classy wine. And this is basically some, marketing specialist, or maybe the winemaker himself, wrote these tasting notes. And they said, very deep, youthful color, intense, almost purple hue. And then they use phrases like violets, ripe plum, cedarwood, fennel, spiciness, licorice, dark fruit. So all of these kind of comparative phrases where you compare the wine flavor against another flavor that people can identify with. So this is kind of a very typical style of tasting notes. Right, now we want to talk about prompt design a little bit. And I want to give you a quick demo, but again, it's called MakerSuite here. The thing looks exactly like it used to look before, but it's now called Google AI Studio. So this is the website for Google AI Studio. I have it ready here. So let's start by, let's forget this. The first thing you have to do is, whenever you want to do an LLM experiment, is you have to create an API key. Now, the API keys should be treated as passwords, so I won't show you mine. You can just create your own. It's very simple. And then from there, you can create different prompts. And you can prepare different prompts and then play with them. There's a prompt gallery here that gives a lot of examples. Okay, fonts are too small, so let's forget this. I'll show you the one that I have prepared. So here's a prompt that I have prepared for my wine snob. I said, write tasting notes for the parameter, for the input. The tasting notes should be in the style of a wine critic and should mention the wine style, taste, and production process. Keep the result to one paragraph. It is running on the Gemini Pro model. Now, this used to be the PaLM model, but now that has switched to Gemini automatically. And there's some extra dials that I can basically influence the randomness. I can add some safety stops and so on. So this prompt now I want to test out and see if it does the right thing. So let's say we use the 2020 Bias Clouvre Pinotage. That is now one typical input, and I want to run this input against my prompt and see if the result makes any sense. Okay, I'm not going to read this entire thing to you. I'm just eyeballing it. It actually looks pretty good. This is the type of tasting note I was after. So to come up with this text took me a while. Like, I played around with different words. I added more kind of style information, like keep the result to one paragraph, that kind of stuff. So, but by now I'm quite happy with it. So now it's time to generate code. And here you find that in the code generation part, so I clicked on the top right corner here, it has different languages, but it doesn't have Flutter or Dart. It doesn't matter though, because it has curl. So here's a curl command. Curl is a shell tool that allows to do HTTP requests from the shell, from the command line. You have, post, get, head requests. You give it a URL. You give it a header or a bunch of headers, and then you give some payload. And this is basically what we need to describe this model. What I had used for my example looked slightly different, just because that was pre-Gemini, so I was still using the old model, but basically the style was the same. There's a URL, headers, and a body. All right, so that's all for MakerSuite. Let's go back to the talk. So at this point we have a prompt, and now it's time to write the Flutter app and use that prompt in our Flutter app. Now, I don't have time to write an app from scratch, so I cheated a little bit and took an app that is developed as part of a code lab. There's a Google Code Lab that builds a haiku generator. And when you go through that code lab, it's really nice. It's kind of in a few easy steps, it explains how to do this haiku generator. You end up with an app like that. It allows you to, it starts with a pull-down menu with a few Google products. You can select one of these products, like here, for example, I selected Android, and then you say generate haiku, and that means a prompt is sent, so the PaLM API is used to send a prompt to the model, and the result gets sent back and displayed. So here it will send back 5 different haikus about Android. And these haikus are actually really cool and funny. It's a lot of fun to play with this. I really enjoyed it. So this was the code lab. I played through the code lab, and basically at the end of the code lab, you end up with this product, with this repo. Now, when you look at the code, you come across the PaLM repository implementation. And what you see here is an asynchronous HTTP post, which takes a URL, a header or headers, multiple headers, and a body. Now that is exactly what we had just seen in MakerSuite, or I already forgot the new name, MakerSuite. Yeah, so this is basically where we need to drop our new code in. So if we want to modify this for our WineSnap example, we need to change the URL. So in this case here, I use text bison because that was the PaLM API. So Gemini would be, for Gemini, this line would be different. The headers is probably the same. It's always application JSON. And then for the body, Gemini might also require slightly different things. But you basically had copied that from this section here. Okay, and then once you've set the URL and the body, you can do again your asynchronous HTTP call. There is one little change I had to make to get this example to work. The way the haiku generator passes the result that you get back from your asynchronous call was a little bit strange. So I didn't like the counter here, so this for loop that has a hard counter. And it checks for the results in content, and it turns out that different models label their results differently. Some call them content and others call them output. So I changed this this loop a little bit into a functional loop, and then checked for content or output, just so that it would work with different models. That's the only change I really had to do to the haiku model. So what we have at this point is we have still says haiku generator. You can choose one of the Google products. but then it actually sends the prompt to the model asking about wine tasting notes. Now this at this point doesn't make a lot of sense. It's now asking for tasting notes about the wine Android, so that still needs to be improved. But you actually get something that looks already like tasting notes. Again, a bit loop-sided because the product is still wrong, the wine is still wrong. So let's fix that last part. For this, we look at the place where that input mask, the form, is generated. And there we need to add a wine description. So I just add it as a string, as a text form field. The text form field grabs the wine description. And then later on, when you send the button get haiku, the wine description rather than the Google product gets dropped in here. I still didn't rename this text. It's still called get haiku text data. That would be renamed in the next step. All right, and here we have the demo, and I can see if I can show this live. Yes, so this is the actual product now, the wine snob. This is how the app looks. I can choose different prompts here. I start with a text prompt, and then I can give it some information. So again, I use the 2020 bias Clough pinotage. And then rather than saying get a haiku, I just said taste it. And it will return, I think, 3 different tasting notes here. Now, once again, because this app was written before December 6th, it is still using PaLM API, not Gemini API, but the technique for Gemini would be exactly the same. All right, that's it so far. You can do the rest now. What you would have to do is first change the prompt from PaLM to Gemini. I already showed you how to get the code snippet in Mica Suite. You just need to drop it into the code. You would need to clean up the code, that code lab thing a little bit, and remove all references to haiku and poem and product and replace that with stuff that with terms that make sense for wine. So it's a bit of cleaning up. And then you probably want to style the result page a little bit. Like I had to add some scrolling and had to show the blocks for the different pages a little bit. And then optionally, I also chose to add a Firebase backend because I wanted to add authentication and result capture. I basically wanted to give the users a chance to comment on the results that they generated. And so all of that is now available in my repo. You can check out my work. You can play with the app. And I also wrote a small Medium article basically repeating what I explained here in the talk. And yeah, if you're curious about this, do study the code repo and, make it your own. So that was the technical part. But the next question I asked myself is like, so how good is this thing? Can generated AI or generated text by AI generated text actually be good enough to pass as tasting notes? And so for that, I looked back a little bit thought a bit about how these tasting notes are structured. And what I realized is there are basically 3 categories of statements in there. So first, there are the hard facts, how it's matured, where it's grown, how long it has been produced, what color the wine has, and so on. Those things are easy to check. You just go, you talk to the winemaker, you go on their website. Each winemaker, when they sell their wine, they have to create a fact sheet where you can see all about the production process. So it's easy to check. The next category is more subjective. These are kind of the flavor comparisons. And this is getting a little bit interesting because, if you're not familiar with wine, this might sound all a bit bizarre. But so typically, not two tasters, even expert tasters, will not come up with exactly the same description of a wine. There's always like one person tastes some plum in this wine, and the next person tastes cherry in this wine. But you have kind of certain families of flavors. So for example, if you have a white wine, you would expect something like pineapple or guava or citrus or so. If you have a red wine and somebody says this red wine tastes of pineapple, something is seriously wrong with that wine. A red wine, you wouldn't be surprised if they say it tastes of leather or tobacco or espresso. If it's a pinotage, for example, it very often tastes of espresso, coffee, or chocolate. So you expect certain groups of flavor profile, but you can't say exactly what the wine taster would come up with. So there's a little bit of a gray area there. Some descriptions make sense. You can't ultimately say this is right or wrong, but some descriptions would absolutely make no sense, and I could easily say like, hey, this is not correct. And then the last group of statements about wine, those are kind of marketing fluff, poor poetry, stuff like linear acidity. I'm not sure anybody knows what that means. It just sounds good. So let's see how the tool did. So this is a text that is now AI generated. The input I gave was 2018 Jostenberg Baccamat. Jostenberg is a small boutique winery near Stellenbosch. It's a very popular winery. It's well known. There's, it's definitely it's on the internet, and so. But I intentionally chose the Baccamat because Baccamat is the name of their flagship wine. But it doesn't give anything away about the grapes or whether it's a red or white wine. So Baccamat is actually the name of the family or the mother-in-law of the winemaker, I think. Or the mother, I'm not sure. No, it's a maiden name of the mother of the winemaker. So it's just a name. It doesn't give anything away about how this wine was produced or anything. So what AI made of this is, they said, the 2018 Jostenberg Baccamat is a full-bodied, complex red wine with aromas of blackberries, plums, and cherries. It has a smooth, velvety texture and a long, lingering finish. The wine is made from a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Shiraz grapes, and it was aged in oak barrels for 18 months. This wine is perfect for enjoying with grilled meats, roasted game, or hearty pasta dishes. Now again, this is not a human wrote this is AI generated. So now, what do you think of this? So to be honest, I was blown away when I read this. And by the way, this is still the old PaLM API model. Gemini is even better. I think the tone is fantastic. The style and the tone, in all my experiments, I've never caught the AI tool to make a grammar mistake or so. This writing is always flawless. It feels like, I would not be surprised to read this text in a sales brochure. So it seems very, very well written. So they absolutely get an A+ for style and tone from me. On the kind of subjective flavor category, full-bodied, complex, blackberries, plum cherry, grilled meats, game, hearty pasta dishes, all of this sounds believable. So I can't prove whether, professional tasters would actually taste blackberries in this wine, but having a red wine having blackberries used for a red wine is not that uncommon. So all of these terms are believable. So, I basically shrugged and said, sure. Where it gets more interesting now is on the hard facts. It says a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Shiraz. That's a very good bet, but it's wrong. This particular wine is a Cabernet Sauvignon, Touriga Nacional, and Mourvèdre, I think. It might have Shiraz in there as well. I forgot the exact thing, but it is, so the blend they are recommending here, or they're choosing here, is a very typical blend for South African wines, but it's not the correct blend for this particular wine. So clearly this statement is wrong. Same with the aging process. It said aged in oak barrels for 18 months. It was aged in oak barrels, but for 20 months, and they made a big deal about aging it in barrels of different age. So some were first fill barrels, so used for the first time, and some were second fill barrels. This text does not really reflect that, and the 18 months is definitely wrong. So where does this get us now? If we look back at this, I find this pretty scary all of a sudden, because this text looks so slick, and kind of just eyeballing it, it's like, yeah, it's a red wine, it's full-bodied, all of this makes sense. But really, the lies are kind of buried in the text, and you need to be very careful. You need to really second guess each word. Like, is it really oak barrels? Is it really 18 months? Just because the text looks roughly good, you cannot rely on it to be actually correct. So this is my disclaimer now. So first of all, I used the PaLM API, not the Gemini API. Gemini is more powerful, but actually when I did the similar test with Gemini, the text was slightly different, but it was kind of the same style. And basically Gemini has the same problems. Because it's, the model doesn't know anything about reality or about the wine. It's just doing text completion. It will drop in good guesses. Very often a wine description has 18 months in oak barrel, so let's put that in. But what I should point out here now is my experiment. So I'm kind of criticizing the model now and ripping it apart. It's not completely fair. Because the models are not supposed to do what I made it do. So I gave it very little context. I just gave it basically 3 words about the wine, the vintage, the farm, and the wine, and the name. And that's not enough information about, a more, I think a more realistic experiment would have been to give the model a list of adjectives that a professional taster has chosen about this wine, and ask the model to generate a sound text of these from these adjectives. So in that sense, I was cheating a little bit. On the other hand, I don't feel too bad about it, because a lot of us use AI in this way. I mean, who hasn't put in their homework into ChatGPT and expected, the essay that comes out to be correct? And that is I think the danger, and something that we all need to realize and need to make peace with. These factual errors, people call them hallucinations. I was aware that hallucinations exist when I started this experiment, but I always thought, oh well, sure, I'll pick them out. Once it tells me that Stellenbosch is a beer producing town, I will know it's a hallucination. But no, the hallucinations are small little truth and lies and half lies embedded in a really nice copy. So it's getting very, very. You have to be really on your toes to check the model and spot the inaccuracies. And you can't take everything that comes out of the model at face value just because it looks roughly right and you fact checked a few things. Right, so I'm at the end of my talk. I just want to briefly summarize what this experiment taught us now. So first of all, I hope I convinced you that adding generative AI to a Flutter app is absolutely trivial, and I'm really looking forward to all of your cool generative AI ideas. When you get started with this, the biggest challenge is the prompt design. And Maker Suite helps you with this prompt design. Again, I forgot the new name. I think it's Generative AI Studio. Everything from there is just standard Flutter. It deals with asynchronous API calls, text manipulation, result display one at a time, or on a scrolling page, or in collapsible blocks, or whatever you choose. If you are unsure about this, have a look at the Haiku Generator Code Lab. I think it's a very well-written code lab and a very well-written example. So for me, getting started with this combination was quite helpful. When it comes to the content, I had to realize that generative AI can act like an actual wine snob, but I also have to admit it's bluffing. So be remain critical, remain vigilant. Do question everything you hear from generative AI, and there are some very good things in there, but not all generative AI says is true. And yeah, that is it. I hope on the day of the screening I'll be able to log in and talk to you guys and have maybe a bit of a Q&A session. But if this does not work out, I'm really hoping that you guys can contact me. Feel free to reach out if you have questions about this talk, if you want to discuss your project with me or so. Just reach out via social media and I'll see if I can get, if we can have a discussion about this. And that's it. And enjoy the rest of the conference and have a good day and happy DevFest.